Hi, my name is Kevin Brennan, and I'm a consultant to the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation. And I want to welcome everybody to today's first ever Advocacy Week webinar. This is a new event for the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, and we're going to be having an entire virtual lobby week where we're going to be asking our senators and representatives to take action on areas in research and medical care that are of vital importance to individuals and families living with myotonic dystrophy. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I have been a consultant to the foundation for over 5 years. And it's been really my great pleasure to work with, Tanya and Jeremy and Martha and others on the board to help launch this new effort under the sort of architecture of the new strategic plan for the organization that has allowed us to establish the first ever grassroots advocacy committee known as the National Advocacy Committee, and it's under their leadership that we're leading this effort. And we're going to walk through today a few issues that are of real importance and teach folks how to become better advocates, and in some cases, first-time advocates. My background before joining the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation as a consultant has been in multiple roles here in Washington, D.C. I've spent about a decade working for several different senior members of the House of Representatives. Most recently, I was chief of staff to Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro from New Haven, Connecticut, who is the chair of the House Appropriations Committee. I also worked for then Congressman, now Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio, who's on the Finance Committee, but at the time I was his legislative director when he was the ranking Democrat on the House Energy and Commerce Committee's Health Subcommittee. In between some of those stints on the Hill, I spent 8 years leading the Arthritis Foundation's public policy and advocacy office that was in Washington, D.C. The foundation, like Myotonic Dystrophy, which is headquartered, of course, in California, the foundation is headquartered in Atlanta, but we had a presence, have a presence in Washington, D.C. to advance public health research, access to care issues that were important. So it was my responsibility to help build that agenda in cooperation and support with the board and the volunteer leadership of the organization, and then really to help grow our grassroots and grass tops advocacy presence so that we could have maximum influence in trying to achieve some of those goals. I also have psoriatic arthritis, and so I've experienced that from a patient perspective. And during the time I was at the Arthritis Foundation, there was an absolute complete revolution in care for people with inflammatory arthritis. I know that's something that we're looking to achieve with myotonic dystrophy, insofar as we want to have FDA-approved products that actually treat and have on the label that they treat myotonic dystrophy. And the ultimate goal, of course, is to have a cure. But knowing some of those challenges of bringing those products to market and how that changes the insurance dynamic and what have you, I went to work at a large biotech company called Amgen from there, where I had an opportunity to understand the innovation that's in a company, the risks that companies take, the challenges that they face. So I like to think of myself as having had sort of a 360 view of healthcare, and that I've seen it from the, the policy side in Congress. Also have seen it from the innovator side as far as developing new products, and I've seen it from the point of view of the patient community. So it's been a real honor to take some of those skills and apply them to what we're doing today. So wanted to just kind of walk through quickly what we're going to do. We want to talk about the National Advocacy Committee and what we're doing and some of the goals that we've established. We want to talk a little bit about the history, just because there's a lot that we have to be proud of as far as what we've accomplished in an organization. And then provide a bit of an overview about where things are in Congress, where things are in the Biden administration, and really with a focus on why should we care about that relative to what we're trying to do. And then walk through what are our advocacy goals for this year, and how do we help understand and explain those. And then really just getting into the nuts and bolts of doing a congressional meeting. I like to really stress in these conversations that, your senators, your representatives, they're here to represent you, and they should have an open door, and they should be open and listening to what we have to say. And it's their job to be responsive and to translate into policy that's going to help their constituents, us. Okay, so just giving you guys a little bit of sense of sort of the scope, right? We are a rare disease. I know that that's, there's times where that's frustrating as far as trying to get, larger awareness and attention. But, what I love about this slide, when you're looking at the members of the board who are highlighted, and then you're looking at the other folks who are on the committee who are highlighted, It's a really impressive, breadth across the country. And when you think about that from our advocacy perspective, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, leverage every single interested volunteer, friend, physician, researcher who wants to join this movement, so that we're speaking with as loud a voice as possible in as many congressional districts and states as we possibly can. But this is, just a little bit of a sense of kind of who we are and where folks are in the organization. So as I mentioned earlier, the organization has a new strategic plan, a very exciting plan that's very focused on moving us into the future and to improving healthcare for people with myotonic dystrophy, but really helping to increase research, which in turn will lead to, treatments and a cure. So some of that involves, federal funding for research. Some of that involves partnerships with different stakeholders to try to make sure that we can quickly move, new discoveries, new products through the FDA process, and make sure that when they're through that process, that there's adequate insurance coverage for those therapies. So as we think about that, we wanted to, the board was thinking about, how do we develop new relationships? How do we grow existing relationships with members of Congress and their staff? And as one of my political heroes, Tip O'Neill, who was Speaker of the House, has said repeatedly, all politics is local. And that's why that map is really quite important, because, it just gives you a sense. Sometimes you're going to have more strength when you're talking to, your representative, your senator from your hometown. So we want to continue to think about ways to grow that presence. We want to recruit new grassroots advocates. I want to see that map. I know the board wants to see that map with, red, dots all over it, where we know we have folks that are engaged. They have a sense of how to advocate to Congress or even in their state capitals on issues of importance. And then we also want to identify, we describe them as grass tops, but these are folks who are community leaders, that have an outsized, voice for any number of reasons. It might be that they're a major employer in a community, but there's somebody that, a member of Congress might pay a little bit more attention to, knowing that they have kind of outsized influence. And so we want to identify those individuals who can help us in our advocacy. So that's another important goal. And then so tactically, we were charged with, thinking about how to, do some trainings, how to get more folks involved. And look, in an organization like ours, you might have some folks that are more interested in doing special events, or might be more interested in doing, support groups. And some folks may be more interested in doing, advocacy. And so we want to make sure that these menu of options are out there. And we want to provide, opportunities to talk and train and learn and help folks grow. Martha, in a few slides, Martha Montag-Brown, who is the vice chair of the national board, she's going to talk a little bit about some of the work that she did in California, which I think is going to be incredibly instructive for folks who are new to this and really want to demystify what this is, because I know that, in any walk of life, you've got language, terms, ways of doing things that can seem intimidating or don't welcome people in. And Congress is particularly guilty of that. We use words like a committee markup or, other things that don't make a whole lot of sense. And what a markup is just a vote on a bill. Maybe back in the day, they used to take pens and actually mark up the legislation, and that's how it came to its meaning. But at the end of the day, we're talking about taking important ideas that are going to help improve the lives of, the people we care about, how to help Congress, rally around those ideas and either pass laws that do those things or increase funding. But it really is a very simple exercise, and we want to, take a lot of time to just make this accessible for folks. So when we talk about what have we accomplished as an organization, we've accomplished a lot in the few years that we've been in existence. So when we go all the way back to, not that long ago, 2014, and Kayla and her mom, you see here, testifying before Congress in support of reauthorization of the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act. That set up Wellstone centers. One of those is focused on myotonic dystrophy. It increased some funding, for some of these programs. It did a little bit more around surveillance, so we could understand, who is being diagnosed with these conditions, trying to make sure that we're, capturing that information to help feed it into the larger dynamic around care and healthcare benefits and all of those important things. And then the bottom bullet you'll see here, that tells you sort of the baseline funding that the National Institutes of Health was providing at the time for myotonic dystrophy research. And what you're going to notice here is as this timeline progresses, it moves up a little bit, but not enough, I think, for our liking, which is why we've got a big focus when we get to that section around how we're trying to do new and different things to increase funding for research at the federal level. So 2015, Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation had our annual meeting in Washington, D.C., and we had a really exciting briefing on a Department of Defense initiative we're going to get to in a minute called the Peer-Reviewed Medical Research Program. And we invited in some veterans who were living with myotonic dystrophy. Sadly and unfortunately, in the case of some of these folks, they were discharged from the military before they had received a diagnosis. And because of some of the symptoms that they were experiencing, they were thought to be not living up to their, military, code or work ethic. And so in some cases, they were discharged and lost some of the benefits that were due to them. And we know that that's something that's unfortunately more common than we'd like to see. But we took that and used that as a way to get to a victory, which I'll get to in a minute. So then 2016, focusing on the need to get more attention and focus and investment from the pharmaceutical industry, the foundation hosted the first ever patient-focused drug development meeting in Washington, D.C. with senior leadership at the FDA. And we included some of our pharmaceutical partners. And what we wanted them to understand is, given all of the symptoms that, can affect an individual living with myotonic dystrophy, where do we sort out what are the most important things for us to make sure that industry and FDA understands that, these are some of the things that we care about most as they're designing these clinical trials and they're thinking about some of the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. We think about daytime sleepiness, executive function, some of the myotonia and the muscle issues. There's unfortunately a lot of things to think about. And we really wanted to make sure that the FDA and the companies heard directly from patients about what this really means. So then moving into 2017, another significant victory. So individuals with congenital DM, where there is such an obviously and clear, again, unfortunately, reason for these individuals to qualify for enhanced Social Security, disability, and health insurance benefits, it can take, 2 years to sort of move through that very bureaucratic process. But there is a compassionate allowance program that allows people to skip some of those steps when it's so obvious that they're in need of these benefits and deserving of these benefits. So we met with Social Security in Baltimore. We worked with members of Congress. We helped to make a very strong case that we should be included in that program. And individuals with congenital DM are now included. So that was a major, major victory. That was also the same year that the FDA, we were able to deliver sort of the summary document from that patient-focused drug development meeting, and that's called the Myotonic Dystrophy Voice of the Patient Report. And that's something that, if you haven't seen, you should take a look at. It's a really valuable and important piece to really help shape how we're pursuing with some of these pharmaceutical discoveries. So you can also see that, NIH funding jumped up a bit to 11 million. Moving to 2018, this was the year where we were able to finally get included in what we call the Department of Defense Peer-Reviewed Medical Research Program. So what this did was it made myotonic dystrophy eligible for funding. It didn't automatically lead to researchers around the world or in the United States getting funding, but it said that there's roughly a pot of anywhere between $300 and say $400 million in funding that's appropriated annually. And there's a list of anywhere from 55 to 65 diseases and conditions that are eligible. So a researcher at, say, the University of Rochester or the University of Florida or even Stanford who is interested and has a great idea that they want to pursue, they could submit that as long as it has myotonic dystrophy as a primary component of it, and it'd be eligible for review and possibly even funding. And that led to an increase of $3.1 million in new research on top of the $13 million that was already there for NIH. So moving into 2019, Tim Halen from Massachusetts testified before the House Appropriations Committee and made a strong and passionate appeal for more research dollars, more federal funding there, and that was super important. Researchers were successful in getting 2.4 million in PRMRP funding. We continue to be eligible. One thing about that program for PRMRP is you have to go every single year to advocate to make sure you're included in that budget. And then, sorry, I'm going to move something so I can see something. Okay, so looking at 2020, we were able to get report language in the House Appropriations Bill that really looked at, continuing to emphasize the need for more research funding to address the fact that we still do not have an FDA-approved treatment. You can see below, again, tracking along with the research funding. And then in 2021, Senator Kim Kaine of Virginia, who is a previous board member of the foundation, introduced the first ever Senate resolution that declares September 15th as International Myotonic Dystrophy Awareness Day. Now that's something where we've built bipartisan support. In Minnesota, we have Senators Klobuchar, and then we have, Senator Lummis from Wyoming, our Republican lead. But they are continuing to proceed and moving this forward through the Senate. But it is there, and it's an incredible victory for the organization. Okay, so just wanted to highlight real quickly what I talked about, International DM Day. It's a really important, opportunity to grow in international recognition. There's been a number of other countries besides the United States that have been moving this forward, including Canada and the UK and others. And I know on our call today, we even have folks from other countries who are joining us, which I'm particularly, proud and grateful to say that I'm doing something that's speaking to an international audience. And I think that's also a tribute to the foundation and what we're able to do and our reach and our partnerships. A lot of what we're going to be talking about when I get into the next parts of this presentation are going to be very specific to the United States Congress and how our government works. But if you're in a country that has a democracy that is built around a legislature, and you have elected representatives, a lot of what we talk about is going to be applicable. It might not exactly be the same structure when you're talking about our sort of constitutional structure versus a parliamentary democracy, where electing folks to a parliament or a diet has some bearing on actually who then is the prime minister, whereas in this country there's sort of separate tracks on that. Okay, so I highlighted a little bit here, but this again is a little bit around what we've been able to do successfully around the PRMRP program. And again, this is really a huge accomplishment. There's not many diseases and conditions that get included. This will be the 5th year in a row that we've been included. Each year, we talk to a number of senators. In this case, we've had support from Senator Kaine, Senator Brown, Coons, Capito, Murphy, Feinstein, Menendez, Cornyn, and Barrasso. So we've got great, strong bipartisan Senate support, and that's led to about $7.7 million in research funding. We're still waiting to see what the FY22 awards are. And we've also had volunteers from the organization who have been reviewers, who have actually served on the body that review this, and they're lay people who actually learn from this experience. You don't have to be a researcher to do that. And I think again, it's really important to have that lay perspective so they understand what it's like to live with myotonic dystrophy. So I'm going to use this opportunity to transition to our next slide and invite my colleague Martha Montag Brown, who's a member of the National Advocacy Committee, but also a vice chair of the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, and she's going to walk through really the work that she did that led us to this success. If it weren't for the great work that Martha and her friends and her strong network in California did, we wouldn't be talking about the PRMRP program. So let me move to the next slide, and Martha, it's all you.
Thank you, Kevin, and I'm so glad to be here with all of you today. So I'm going to just share briefly the story of how we got involved in doing advocacy for MDF. So our son was diagnosed with adult onset in January of 2017, and as I'm sure all of you can relate, that is a absolutely devastating moment in life. And when we sort of came to, and then subsequently 2 of our other nieces and my sister and I were all diagnosed. So when we sort of got through the shock of all that, we immediately thought about, well, what can we do? So I reached out to the foundation and asked what did they need? What could we do? How could we help? Because that was how we felt we would best be able to cope with this. So I was told at the time, this was probably spring of 2017, that an organizational priority was to get this PRMRP funding that Kevin has just described. And we were told that what was needed was to have a senator sponsor this. And it turned out that one of our two senators in California, Dianne Feinstein, was on the right committee. So she was a good target. And working with Kevin, I sort of gained an understanding. And from there, I just cold called her office. I called whoever, the receptionist picked up the phone. I said, I'm a constituent, I'm a mom, and my son was just diagnosed with this, and I want to find out how I can get our disease on the list of approved diseases through this particular program. And so, of course, she took my name. I didn't hear back in a day or two. So I called again, didn't hear back. But then when I called the third time, she put me through to a very junior, young legislative assistant who was younger than my son, and just either a college intern or just out of college. And I explained to him our whole story. And I said, I want to come back to DC. I want to meet with the senator. I want to meet with all of you because we have to make this happen. We need to. There is no cure or treatment for this disease, and I'm a mom, and I can't live with this. So he, pretty much, I just wouldn't take no for an answer. So a few weeks later, I was in the office in DC meeting with him and a couple of other staff. Never got to meet the senator on that visit. But what happened there was really critical, which is I told him the story, explained about the disease, and most importantly, enlisted his support. And I said, would you help me? Would you help me get the senator to support this, or at least seriously consider it? And how can we do that? How can we get this on her radar? So he was wonderful. And he said the way to get it on her radar, everybody's different. Every senator, every congressman and woman is different. But for this Senator Feinstein, the best thing to do is to mobilize a network and pick a week and have everybody call and email, but more in her office, calling was what got the most attention, and have everybody call during the week. And use a set of talking points and tell them what you want. We are calling the senator because we are Californians and we're constituents, and we want you to put myotonic dystrophy on the list of diseases. So I said, thank you so much. We picked a week and came back to California. We emailed everybody we knew and asked them to email everybody they knew, and we gave them a little script. And we picked a week, I don't know, sometime a month or two later, and we had a massive response, such that by day 3 or 4 of the week, people were being told, I know, but with one word out of their mouth, they said, you're calling about myotonic dystrophy, and they would say yes. And all they ended up caring about was what zip code they were from in California. And it was interesting. We learned that when working with a senator, having the more zip codes, the better. So we really then immediately for the rest of that week said, we need people from all different zip codes, find people from all over the state of California. So we did. At the same time, we were told that it would be really important to put together a clear rationale for her that she could take to the committee, why this should be on the list of approved diseases for this particular program. Kevin earlier mentioned the veterans that are a part of our community, and this is a program through the Department of Defense. So we put together a letter stating what our ask was. We referenced veterans. We gave 3 or 4 examples of veterans and their names and locations and what had happened to them. They were dishonorably discharged and why. Dianne Feinstein, we knew, was a Stanford grad. Of course, Dr. John Day and one of the centers for myotonic dystrophy is in California. So we got a letter from Dr. Day, and we put together our request, and that went to her. And then all the while, we were staying in touch with her staff. So I had never spoken to her, but the staff was really supportive and very helpful. And I felt like they were really engaged as partners with us. So as Kevin said, ultimately it miraculously happened, and we were added to the list of approved diseases. What I would say as a quick aside is, of course, we then communicated that back to this big network of people we knew and people we didn't know who had called. And it meant so much to people who so want to help. It was a very easy thing for them, but they really were so thrilled that their call had made a difference. And annually, when we find out that we're still on the list of approved diseases, I send my emails out saying, thanks to you, we're now at over $7 million of funding. So keeping those folks engaged, and hopefully they'll call again. So we now, as Kevin had said, we are now waiting to hear year 4. And I think what I would say just in closing is the importance of maintaining the relationships. We made a point, as I said, of staying in touch with staff. We made a point of recognizing Senator Feinstein. We actually awarded her with a special award from the foundation, and were able to present it to her personally and take a picture and send that out. We stayed in touch. Her DC staffers have changed over the last 4 years. We've kept in touch with whoever was in the right position, but I've also kept in touch with her California staff. And because of all the changes in DC, we found it was really helpful to have a California staff person. If we weren't getting a call back, we could ask that person to help. So in conclusion, I would just encourage you all. It was really, I was surprised. I had never done anything like this. And it was really, the power of being a mom, a sister, a friend, and a daughter, that is what makes the difference. So thank you. I know I'd be happy to answer any questions anytime. Feel free to reach out to me, and thank you for your interest in this. So back to you, Kevin.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Martha. So let me, I'm going to move forward, but before I do, I think we've got one of our other members. I'm not going to call on her because she's muted, but I wanted to just recognize too that Emily Jones and the work that she's done in New York with Dr. Thornton and the University of Rochester, and they a few months ago had set up a meeting with their member of Congress, Joe Morrell, and really helped touch him about, hey, look, there's a really important center of myotonic dystrophy research happening right here in your backyard. Use that as a way to make him aware of it, and has really done a great job of building a relationship with him and his staff that we hope to leverage, as we get into some of the things that we're going to talk about. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot of folks out there who are taking advantage of these opportunities and trying to build these relationships, and I think it's important. So when we get a chance, it'll be great to maybe highlight Emily and a few other folks that are doing other things around the country. Okay, so here's my quick congressional overview. So the Democrats right now hold very narrow majorities in the House and Senate. I say that simply not as a partisan issue, but simply it does make it a little difficult at times to advance legislation, particularly in the Senate, that requires most often a supermajority of 60 votes out of 100 to overcome a filibuster. Partisanship, I probably don't have to tell anybody on this webinar, is still high, which is unfortunate. There are opportunities to advance, shared interests, but it's unfortunately a fact of life. That's made a little bit more challenging because we're heading into what's called the midterm elections, meaning, a president serves a 4-year term. At the 2-year mark, every single member of the House of Representatives is up for re-election. So that's 435 members of Congress that have to earn your vote to return. In the Senate, they serve in 6-year terms. So every 2 years, roughly a third of the senators are up for re-election. That is by design through the Constitution. So you're going to have a bunch of important Senate races that are happening in places like Ohio and New Hampshire and Arizona and other places. And given that the Senate is literally a 50-50 split between the parties, with Kamala Harris, the Democratic vice president, being the tiebreaker, that's what gives the Democrats the majority. But that just shows you just how razor thin these majorities are. Where that has an effect is it took them about 5 months longer than it should have in order to pass the appropriations bills for the current fiscal year that we're living in, which is fiscal year 2022. And those fiscal years run from October 1st to September 30th. So they passed that a few weeks ago, fairly far into the fiscal year. And that kind of then crunched up the amount of time we have to take up the fiscal bills for year 2023. And I'll explain a little bit more of how that's going to work. Essentially, we are right in the middle of that process now, and that's going to have some bearing when we talk about our appropriations request, which I'll get to in a second. Some of the larger sort of swirling, legislation that's going to be moving. One is called PDUFA, which stands for the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. What that essentially says is about 25 years ago, roughly, there was a consensus that the FDA didn't have the resources to keep pace with innovation that was happening in the pharmaceutical space. And they just weren't able to as quickly review some of these clinical trials and these applications as they'd like. So what they did was they said, we're going to have user fees established for each time a company submits a new device or pharmaceutical product for review. And then the agency in turn commits to a timeline for actually reviewing and either approving or not approving a product, but it's trying to accelerate that in the safest way possible so that we maintain the safety and efficacy of the products that are coming out of the FDA. There's been some talk about a pandemic preparedness bill. There's some talk about a mental health package that may happen. These are just a few of the healthcare bills that may emerge this year that we're keeping an eye on. This is just a quick snapshot of the current leadership. Nancy Pelosi from Northern California and San Francisco is the Speaker of the House. Kevin McCarthy, who is down in Bakersfield, south of that, is the minority leader. So no matter what happens, I suspect that the leader of the House of Representatives next year will be from California. You've got Chuck Schumer from New York, who is the current Senate Majority Leader, and Mitch McConnell is the Senate. I'm sorry, my bad, I got a typo there. He's not the Majority Leader, he's the Minority Leader, but essentially they're 50-50, so maybe that's where my typo came from. Want to walk through quickly, just as I said, the appropriations process. I gave you the timeline. It generally starts with the president after the State of the Union submitting a budget. Congress then does a budget resolution which sets sort of the broad parameters of spending. We're now in the middle of what's the appropriations season, where there's hearings to invite CDC or the NIH or other various agencies to testify before Congress to explain why they have requested the amount of funding for different programs and things that they have. And then the Appropriations Committee, in turn, then it's their job to construct an actual budget. So they take, some parts of the president's budget they may lower, they may increase, they may add more restrictions, more requirements, but that process usually wraps up in the House in the June, July timeframe. The Senate, as a rule, generally follows behind them. Lately, they've been falling way behind them and not getting them done in the summer before they go for August recess, but in September, which really creates a big time crunch. And so what they're generally supposed to do with all 12 of these appropriations bills, there's the one we care the most about would be the Labor and Health and Human Services and Education bill. So all three of those cabinet agencies are looked at and funded by one subcommittee out of the 12. The Defense Department, where the PRMRP program resides, that's one subcommittee. But each of those subcommittees, they have to move their bills through full committee, and then they have to be considered by the full House and Senate that vote on them, and then whatever differences exist are supposed to be worked out through a meeting or conference between those two bodies, and then they're supposed to have those passed before September 30th. Lately, we haven't met those deadlines, meaning that Congress has had to pass what's called a continuing resolution, which just keeps the same funding level from the previous fiscal year in place until they enact a new bill. I think talking to some folks that yesterday on the Appropriations Committee, I think there's a real hope that they're going to get their bills done sooner this year, and they'll actually have them done over the summer, and they'll try to even get them done before we move into the sort of the fall crunch. Okay, So let's talk a little bit about some of the policy goals that we're articulating. This is basically I talked in the beginning about selling ideas. These are the ideas, as Martha mentioned, that we're going to be selling to Congress. So I'm going to actually start at the bottom and work my way to the top. So the first one we're going to be doing is a new innovative idea around the family of repeat expansion diseases, which includes myotonic dystrophy. And as one of our committee members, our National Advocacy Committee members, Eric Wang, who's a PhD researcher at the University of Florida and who's really been a really articulate voice on this, myotonic dystrophy, what we're learning about that really is the driving force behind the idea that we don't know enough about the human genome. And those unanswered questions have really been sort of led by our understanding of myotonic dystrophy. So when we think about this family, if you will, of repeat expansion diseases, it's us, but it's also one of the forms of ALS, Huntington's disease, and there's several others. Congress oftentimes is reluctant to focus attention on one specific disease or infectious disease or illness. There's exceptions. You've seen it with Alzheimer's disease and others, but in general, I think we get more lift from Congress when they see a group of illnesses where there's a lot of unanswered questions, where there's an opportunity for NIH to make a more significant investment that will lift a lot of research. And so Eric has really helped us think through what this is going to look like. So this is one of the requests that we're asking Congress to do as far as getting the NIH to make a deeper investment to explore this area more fully. And we believe strongly that by doing this, this is going to help increase not only the amount of research that is available for myotonic dystrophy, but it's also going to help us attract new researchers, folks who might be doing things in other areas who are attracted to this new initiative. So this is an area where we're looking for Congress to urge the NIH to do this. And so what's important to understand here is report language is part of the appropriations process, and it's where they encourage or urge the agency to do something. It's not changing a law and creating a program within the federal statute, which is a lot harder to do, but this carries a lot of weight. So when the group of people in Congress who write the budgets for the NIH are telling them we should be doing this, in general, they listen. But it's going to require us as an organization with Eric and others' leadership in the scientific space to really push this forward. So that's one of the things we're asking for this year. The second piece, and this is another new item, as I mentioned, so there's the PRMRP program within the Department of Defense, and that is that large pool of money that we are eligible for, and we're going to continue to seek that. And that is something that is specific to the Senate. What the House of Representatives has is a line item, and there's about 20 or so diseases and conditions that have a dedicated earmarked amount of money. And this is called the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. It's a much more difficult, program to get in. In many ways, they're trying not to include new ones. There's been some understandable resistance, and some of you may remember Senator McCain from Arizona, the late Senator McCain had said, look, I think it's great that you guys are doing all these things, but it doesn't really tie into what the mission of the Department of Defense is around the warfighter. And just as a brief bit of history so you can understand this, about 25 or so years ago, Senator Leahy from Vermont, in partnership with a lot of the breast cancer community or the breast cancer organizations, they were frustrated that NIH wasn't devoting enough time and attention and interest in the area of breast cancer research. They created this program at the Department of Defense. And so over time, they've really tried to link it to, how does it affect the quote unquote warfighter or the folks that are, on the front line protecting our country and doing these really important but very dangerous jobs. And so again, as we talked about it with myotonic dystrophy, we started to pick up, there were a lot of folks that were in the military, undiagnosed. It did seem to tie into our readiness, wanting to understand a little bit better about that, because if you've got somebody who's got, in the case of one of our presenters at our Senate briefing, he said, I was loading really dangerous ordnance underneath, F-15, fighter bombers, and I couldn't retract my hands. I couldn't get a gas mask on. This is really important stuff. So we feel that we are worthy of being included given that that construct, but there are folks who think that this would be more appropriately just detached from the military altogether and sent over to the NIH. But this program is actually managed up in Fort Detrick, Maryland, up in Frederick, which is about an hour north of DC. And we've had numerous conversations with the leadership up there. We've even been up there in person to talk to them about, how to continue to promote this. And I think it's viewed as being a very successful initiative. And so lastly, we're going to continue the work we've done to get as many senators as we can to include this in their requests, so we maintain the funding and the eligibility that we currently have. So going back then to this triplet repeat, the repeat expansion diseases initiative, this is what the actual report language looks like. And I'm just going to read through this real quick just so we all can kind of understand it. You don't have to commit this to memory, but this is what we hope to have included in the report that comes out in June, July, out of the House that funds the NIH. And so what we say here is the committee, meaning the Appropriations Committee, recognizes the rapidly emerging science of DNA repeat expansions, which causes over 50 distinct diseases, including myotonic dystrophy, DM1 and 2, the most common genetic disease of, I'm just going to say ALS because I can't go into that, frontotemporal dementia, and Huntington's disease. Due to recently developed sequencing technologies, a common thread has recently emerged that repeat expansions may underlie multiple neurodegenerative conditions. Again, the Appropriations Committee encourages the NIH, National Institutes of Health, to increase federal funding for research on repeat expansions and considering new funding mechanisms across multiple institutes to support scientific discoveries that will lead to treatments and cures for these genetic disorders. And the last part here that says the committee requests an update for these activities as part of the fiscal 2023 budget justification. That just says, hey, look, we're going to be paying attention. And when the president submits the budget for next year, you need to include in that budget a report on what you've accomplished. What has this initiative done? What are you doing? We're paying attention. Okay. So now that we've sort of got a quick overview of what we're asking for in those 3 bullets, we want to talk about what does it mean to have a successful meeting? How do we do this? Martha's talked a little bit about that, which I think is incredibly helpful. And again, we want to demystify this. You are absolutely within your rights to petition Congress, to petition your representatives on any issue that is on your mind, that you want them to take action on. And you're completely within your rights to hold them accountable. We as an organization cannot and do not endorse candidates. We don't engage in political events. You as an individual can. You can volunteer on a campaign. You can put up yard signs. You can knock on doors. You can do whatever you want. But as far as our entity as a 501c3 organization and our tax status and whatnot, we do not engage in any political activity. But that being said, we can safely, effectively, and legally, advocate for Congress in the way that we're doing here. So right now, we're still kind of living in this quasi world of, do we do in-person meetings? Do we do virtual meetings? This is an area where there is a little bit of a divide, partisan divide. Democrats are still a little bit more leaning on virtual meetings. Republican offices are doing more in-person meetings. But I think in this case, we're going to be, everything that you're going to be asking to do is more or less going to be virtual, either by phone or by Zoom, if that's what you're comfortable with, or even if you wanted to at some point, do meetings in the district office or with your state folks if it's a senator. But that's really, the crux of what we're doing as we move into our lobby week. In most cases, and this is kind of a preference piece, we're giving you the tools to contact the office, and you can start by asking for a meeting with the actual representative or the senator. They will transfer you to the person who handles what they call scheduling in the office, or the scheduler. And that person will take down your information. They're going to want to know, do you live in the state or district? What is it that you want to talk about? We've just gone through that. We want to talk about research. And then they will probably take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to let you know whether that's, or be sure to, I'm sorry, it's usually less than that, to let you know if the member's available. If they're not, they will then hand you off to whoever the healthcare person is in the office to handle the meeting. In some cases, if you want to just go directly to staff, I think that's my preference, but I don't want to, cut that opportunity off, particularly as we're thinking about, opportunities to engage directly with the member. But just know that it might take an extra couple of days if you go down that route. If you call the office or email the office and say, hey, I'm a constituent, I'd like to speak to the healthcare person, that's going to be a path that you can follow. But either way is fine. I'm also available if you have questions after this, of course, to talk through that. So once you get that meeting set up, once you have a date and a time, either a Zoom link or a call or whoever it is that they and you want to coordinate that, what's most important here and what we're making sure folks really, really understand is we're not trying to turn you into a lobbyist for the day. The analogy I have is that I like to bike a lot. A couple of times a year, I have a flat tire. I can do a flat tire change. I'm not great. The guy at the bike store does them all the time, every day. He's really great at it. So we're not trying to turn you into bike mechanics. We're trying to turn you into folks who can basically change a tire. It might take a little longer, but understand that, you're not being expected to be, registered lobbyists who know the ins and outs of a markup versus this. What's important is that you tell the story that is in your heart, that you explain why research is more important. Explaining the struggles, the day-to-day challenges, the fact that we don't have, we don't know enough about myotonic dystrophy. We don't know enough to diagnose it as quickly as we should. We don't know enough that we have, treatments that actually are on the label that are really specifically addressing the challenges that we face that prevent people from, being fully engaged in the workforce or, living as lives as full as they want. And really, that's the piece that you need to focus in on. And then from there, you quickly pivot to, and we're asking you as a result of this to support funding as part of the PRMRP program or the CDMRP program or our NIH report language. And again, we have, and they're posted up on the website, Cleat has been working on making sure that all of that is up, but you're gonna have the leave behind materials that you can review in advance that we've tried to do in a very lay-oriented way so that they're not overly complex or filled with jargon. But once you hand those off, those are the materials that we want them to act upon. So that's why we call them leave behind materials, because you hand them off and they stay with the staff. You may get staff that are really interested and ask a lot of good questions. You may have staff that aren't that interested and maybe they've had a lot of meetings and they're tired and they just kind of thank you and send you on your way. If it's a question you can answer, great. If it's a question you don't have an answer to, there's no reason to be embarrassed. Let us know. Say, hey, I don't have an answer. I will talk to some folks in the organization and I'll get back to you. Always a fantastic way to continue that dialogue by going back to them on that. But don't feel the need to answer something that you don't have an answer to. Always finish the conversation by saying, I really appreciate your, this opportunity to create awareness around this. Hope that the congressman or senator can support, the requests that we have. And then let them know, I'll follow up in a week or two to find out, where you stand on our requests, if you need any more information, if the member of Congress is going to be able to support that or not. That's kind of the key part, because they're going to be much more focused on the fact that they're going to need to provide you with an answer in a couple of weeks, because they'll never have an answer right away. They might say, hey, this is something that's consistent with where my boss has been. I think this is important. They might say, well, we're doing a lot of, my boss is focused on diabetes care and cancer care. He's got a family member. I'm not sure if we can do this. Absorb all that information. And then we'll talk in a minute about making sure that folks report back to us as we move forward and trying to track these meetings and then do a lot of the follow-up, which will be necessary. So this is a little bit, I know these are small, but this is what you'll find on the website as we launch, Lobby Day. This is essentially what a leave behind looks like. These are the first pages of 2-page documents. But the first one talks through the NIH Repeat Expansion Disease Initiative, which we're calling READY. And the other one is, focused in on our defense request. And so those just provide a little more detail, a little more information for the staff that they can absorb, after your meeting and as they're considering these requests. So I'm going to walk through a couple of key dates, and this is going to sort of explain some of what we're trying to do here. So in most cases, all of the language in the 3 requests that I talked about, not only you're going to be asking from them for a constituent perspective, but the role that I play as a consultant to the foundation is there's a process that each congressional office has for officially submitting these requests. And in many cases, some of those deadlines have passed, and I've submitted those. In some cases, we're still in the process of submitting them. But I mention that because you may hear in some of your meetings, well, have you submitted your request? Or our deadline's passed, I don't know whether it's there. be aware that they may ask, that they may not. That is something we absolutely want you to report to us and let us know, where they are in that process. But that is, I think the answer to that is either if you don't know, say, I believe it's been submitted, but I can check back with you. But we've submitted a lot. I don't know that it's going to match with every single meeting. So that's why it's important to let us know. If you think there's an interest, we can follow up and make sure that that is something we track down and submit. But in most cases, we've submitted a lot when we know that we've got advocates who are going to be going into some of these offices. But that's important because if the deadline's missed, that's a reason sometimes for them to come back and say, well, we can't do it this year, but come back next year. But know that we're on that and we're tracking that closely. As we move forward, today's the day of our first webinar. That's in preparation for May 2nd through the 6th, which is our advocacy week. And then, as I mentioned, that is going to track then with when the House and Senate complete work on, I'm highlighting here, the Labor and Health and Human Services bill, which is the NIH portion, but the defense appropriations bills that the CDMRP and the PRMRP are in are also going to follow probably around that same timeline. So then we've talked about the first one. We're going to do a follow-up webinar, and it's going to be on International Myotonic Dystrophy Day, which I think is an awesome opportunity to continue to celebrate and create awareness. But it's also timely because it's going to be around the time where Congress is hopefully wrapping up a lot of this work. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunity to continue to build awareness, continue to hold Congress accountable for our priorities, and continue to move that forward. So we're looking forward to doing that and learning, from folks who participated in the Advocacy Week, and thinking about ways that we continue to drive this relationship building. So as I mentioned, what's really important is everybody, you, your friends, your families, those you invite and join, have them email me. We'll have probably a better system as this grows out, but I'm going to put this all into a spreadsheet so we capture where we've had meetings, and so then from year to year, we're going to be able to track, how we're growing, and then getting a little bit more information about, who we're seeing, what they're saying, but just mapping that generally is important. And then in many cases, I'll use that information, Tanya and myself and the board and the NAC will all be following up and making sure that we're, following up kind of on the being the boots on the ground and making sure that these requests, get included in there. And then, I'm also, as I said, available through email to answer any follow-up questions, anything that you run into that's, a problem or a question, don't hesitate to email me and we can set up a time to talk, figure out ways to include your friends and family or anything and everything that we can do to make this as easy and as accessible a process as we can make it, so that you're the most effective advocates that you can be. So this is the time where folks can ask questions through the chat function. So if you look here, you'll see that in the questions tab to the far right, you'll see that highlighted in gray. If you want to pop in a question, you can type it in there and click send. If you're on a smartphone, it's actually going to be in the form of the question mark icon that's at the top of the screen. Same follow though of typing something out and then hitting send. Up and see if we've had anybody. We have a question here. Are we planning to partner with like advocacy groups who are supporting the other repeat expansion diseases? So that is an awesome question. So we have had some conversations with some groups already. Eric and I and Tanya met with one of the ALS groups. And in fact, it's run by a former colleague of mine at the Arthritis Foundation. And we've talked about it with some of their research folks, and they understand what we're doing. There's been some interest that we want to follow up on doing something that's more in a direct scientific way, where we might involve some researchers that'll be thinking about these collaborative opportunities. But as far as our focus this year on this initiative, this is something that the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation is going to be driving. But we do want to think about, as this matures, ways to more directly involve folks. So I think that is a great opportunity and one that we want to think about and figure out, how to grow and increase. And also, just so you know too, I mean, there's a number of things that are on the priority list for the organization. I'll give you an example: newborn screenings, right? That's a program where, we do a blood draw for a a baby, and they're able to screen for lots of different genetic disorders and other things. We are not among those list of screenings yet, but it is a program that grows and expands. But we are part of a larger partnership of organizations, whether it's through NORD, one of the rare disease groups, or the Every Life Foundation, where I'm involved in some of those meetings and track this for the organization. We understand what's happening there. We're involved in areas where we're looking at health insurance coverage, but those are ones where we are a partner and a participant, and there's obviously a larger chorus of voices that are driving that. Where we focus today are areas where, if it weren't for the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation leading the way, it's likely that Congress wouldn't advance those issues. So we want to make sure that we stay, in the vanguard, and we can bring others along with us who can be supportive. But there are definitely lots of areas that we're collaborating, and I know that Tanya's doing that, and others in the organization. I've had the opportunity to lead and be a part of that and be a voice for the foundation in some of the groups that exist here in DC. See if there are more questions on this. Okay, I think that was it right now. One question I had from some folks, and I was working with the other day, is, there's somebody was asking if there was, an opportunity to, how crowded a space it is. And I think it's important to know that in many of these offices, in a given week, a given month, they're hearing from cancer groups, they're hearing from physicians, they're hearing from insurance companies. The healthcare space is incredibly crowded, and there's lots going on. And so, it's important that we think about our advocacy week as, an annual, everyday occurrence when we can find opportunities to stay on the radar and continue to push this. Oh, one last question. I think we're just at the end here. Our main focus is federal. Are there opportunities or benefits of working at the state and county level? I think there absolutely is. I think this is an area where we're relying on our volunteers and our network of folks around the country to think about where there are issues that we can, problems that can be solved, say on the health insurance front, which is something that is largely regulated, at least for private sector, from the state level. But in some cases, there's opportunities to influence, the research that's happening at, land grant colleges. But I think that's something, as this National Advocacy Committee grows, we want to hear from folks who identify areas where we can apply some of our knowledge and advocacy to help drive efforts at the state level. And I know lots of organizations do partner on things around, access to medications or issues around health insurance coverage. And so there's lots of coalitions and things that we can plug into if folks are interested. I think we are at time. This is at 4 o'clock here on the East Coast. So I'm going to wrap this up. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and really look forward to working with all of you on this journey that we're embarking upon to really expand our reach and our voice and our influence at the federal level, but also globally, and also at the state and county level, to try to make sure that we are moving forward as rapidly as we can, treatments and eventually a cure, and making sure that the healthcare system is in a position to provide important coverage for these new treatments, which can oftentimes be expensive for rare diseases. But this is what we we need and must do in order to improve the lives of every single person living with myotonic dystrophy. So with that, I will thank you, and I will wrap up today's call.